Alright, it's me again, and this is just the usual upload I spent too much time on for no apparent reason other than practicing my limited editing skills on the software I'm using. I'm not expecting this video to get any traction by all means, and I also think the timing is not exactly perfect for that to happen, but I would lie to you if I told you I don't want this video to be seen by the right people, because I think this particular upload of mine raises a couple of important questions regarding the Stop Killing Games campaign that I believe are vital to the final outcome of a potential legislation regarding gamers' consumer rights. Also, I'm aware I said I wasn't gonna upload any more videos about this topic, but things changed pretty quickly, as the Stop Killing Games European petition not only reached, but surpassed 1 million signatures by the end of July, and I suspect that much needed boost just before the finish line was to a great extent influenced by Jacksepticeye and PewDiePie, who reached out to their fans mere 2 days after I called them out in this one. Where is Ireland? Where is Sweden? Surely a single tweet from Jacksepticeye or a short video from PewDiePie would make a difference. Not that they're obliged to, but it just feels so weird seeing people from another continent sorting our shit out.
A lot of us, and is affecting a lot of us who are into the gaming space, which is the Stop Killing Games initiative. I know a lot of people have been asking me to talk about it for a while. In the beginning, I was like, this is a cool initiative.
The only thing they did different is that Sean posted the video and Felix was the guy who sent the tweet, but maybe it was all a coincidence. I doubt that any of them would watch a suppressed video with just over 700 views anyway, but who knows, maybe individuals like them have the uncensored version of this website, unlike us mere mortals. Now, on a serious note, I've had my doubts about how much the Stop Killing Games campaign would achieve from the very first day I learned about Ross Scott's intentions to involve governments and consumer protection organizations. Of course, that isn't to say I don't support his efforts, quite the opposite actually. I'm one of the people who saw the unshittification of the gaming industry happen right before my eyes. From online marketplaces like Steam requiring account verification to apps completely bricking games after they were shut down like Games for Windows Live. I witnessed the birth of all its online titles such as Diablo 3, World of Warcraft, NFS 2015, LA Noire, and even tried to do the same with Assassin's Creed 2 and Splinter Cell Conviction, but I guess that's where people drew the line. And to think that some of you are still wondering why Ubisoft and EA are hiding their emails and have been for years after all the crap they made us see is rather concerning to say the least. I'm fully aware that if we don't do something now, something that would guarantee that our digital purchases are to remain in our possession, in the following few years it might be too late, because by that time publishers will have probably come up with even more disclaimers and EULA paragraphs to shield themselves from any possible future loss in the countries they operate in. And what do you think would happen to the poor customer? You know, the one that fell in love with gaming during the golden age, and since then has been forced to watch his favorite pastime activity slowly dying in agonizing pain inflicted by the Botox man in your beloved overlord. I'll tell you what happens with people like him. He would either move on or start a YouTube channel to mourn the remains of once great franchises. That's why I'm yearning for a reset. But how can I possibly confide in Ross's judgment if he himself isn't raising the important questions? During one of Louis Rossman's streams, where he had invited the Cursed Farms and Matthew Castles to discuss the Stop Killing Games campaign, I actually decided to ask one of those questions in chat myself. I spent $20 just to up my chances of the message being seen by Louis, and funnily enough it was the developer who decided to address it. Louis and Ross were pretending they weren't paying attention to the super chats for some reason, and of course, instead of reading it word by word, Matthew decided to relay the comment in his own words and only touched upon the banning of cheaters in multiplayer games.
Alright, here's an interesting question. It talks about how you ban players for, say, cheating in your game and they lose access to the game and they kind of can't play it anymore. Is an interesting example.
Yeah, see, that's a...
Immediately after that, I suppose out of respect for his buddy, Ross Scott decided to chime in suggesting a rather decent solution to the hacker issue. But here is why it's crucial to read and comprehend the entire message, not just assume what the author meant by leaving it to your own interpretation. It was clear as day that I was referring to players. All players, not just cheaters. People can be banned for griefing, exploiting bugs, advertising websites in chat. You can even lose access to your game if you're a little too crass towards a teammate or someone on the opposite team just because you're sick of playing with idiots. Not to mention daring to type in slurs or cursing in voice chat. You're out for good, no ifs and buts. If you take legal actions against Steam, for instance, even if said actions are totally justified and Steam is 100% at fault, you lose your account and everything in it, period. And I assume that also applies to every major online game merchant. But that isn't even the worst part. The ambiguity of some of those reasons for banning players is what's scarier than the actual worst by definition, because you can't possibly tell if someone is griefing in a battle royale game when, let's say, they're playing more carefully instead of rushing with their team in the most contested zones. From that player's point of view, his teammates might be the ones disrupting the flow of the squad because they're running towards their deaths early. Being rude to each other in chat might just be banter between people who know each other very well, or even total strangers who simply take pleasure in some casual shit talking with others who are just as cocky as them. Or even if that's not the case, what's stopping that one average Stardew Valley player who somewhat ended up in a boys-dominated shooter to just mute everyone so that they don't hear potentially offensive language that might ruin their otherwise devoid of worries and stress day? And the sad part is those types of players are favored by developers and publishers since they don't cause them trouble. Less trouble means less work, and their generally friendly behavior suggests that they also never chase away potential new players as opposed to the average edgelord who rarely shies away from verbal confrontations. It's also important to know that the new age safe space gamers are predominantly agreeable and receptive to whatever publishers throw at them, and that also means the likelihood of them criticizing the quality of modern games, which by the way has gone down the gutter, is pretty low. What if 95% of a set player base finds the name low-hanging scrotum 69 funny, but all those women in the developers' headquarters working in HR and marketing consider it disgusting, sexist and ban-worthy? I can go on for a lot longer than that, just listing annoying corporate mandates set by people who have only used their keyboards to create spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides, but I think I managed to get my point across pretty well with these few examples. You see how the vagueness of all those code of conduct rules in the TOS is just a whole lot of arbitrary garbage that should have never existed in the first place, just a bunch of meaningless restrictions draining every ounce of fun, while also inculcating a sense of constantly being watched over, as if you're some kind of a delinquent prepubescent lad who's been kept away from the good kids as you're shoved away in the corner of a classroom with a dinky hat on. I know I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but I just miss the days when everyone could name their characters they pleased, use their custom avatar, or even in some cases had their own phallus or a pair of honkers as a spray image. It was just dumb and moronic, but it was so damn fun. Another thing I never saw Ross talk about is how games that are being actively supported by their developers are constantly patched, sometimes as often as every week, especially ones with huge and stable player counts. Now, why is that a problem? Isn't fresh content fun and exciting, you ask? Yes and no. While I couldn't care less about free multiplayer games who make a bank off selling battle passes and loot boxes, I can't say I feel the same way regarding titles I pay money for once and expect them to retain the original files for as long as I have them. All of my physical copies work that way. You pop them in the DVD drive, you hear a little whir, and not long after that you get to play the exact same game you bought in 2005. But now that everything requires some form of online verification, if not constant internet connection, whether it's a game on Steam, EA, Epic or Ubisoft Connect, you're subjected to some stupid ass mandatory updates nobody asked for. At some point in the past I imagine a bunch of developers got together for a brainstorming session at their workplace's cafeteria, and one of them suggested, why don't we devise a tool that will help us patch our games post-release so that we don't have to stay overtime. And yeah, fast forward to today's day and age, that live service model led to the birth of lazy development cycles, dumbass skins in games where those aesthetics don't fit at all, censorship in new titles, remakes, remasters, and all sorts of other rubbish in the form of patching jump spots, nerfing unintended movement mechanics, balancing weapons, and the list goes on and on. Here's the thing. I don't mind optional fully fledged DLCs such as new campaigns and map packs. The problem stems from the fact that a mandatory update can turn a game like Agony into My Little Pony, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. If you've played more than 2 hours, you cannot refund the game, and even if hypothetically you decide to sue the devs for ruining what you've given them money for, they could just say, it's just a patch, man. As long as the name stays the same, mandatory patches aren't against the rules. Now, be a good consumer and put that food in your mouth. I don't know about you, but I personally dislike the idea of buying a military shooter and looking at a bunch of Cardi B's shaking their booty around me as if we're in a World Star Hip Hop video after Season Pass 3. It's just stupid, man. That's pretty much the equivalent of getting your hands on a brand new neon green 500cc Yamaha, and after going to bed a bunch of mechanics from the factory you got it from dye the motorcycle pink and replace your handlebar with a candy cane. Why hasn't the Cursed Farms talked about those issues yet is beyond me. Knowing him and what he thinks about the campaign he spearheaded himself, I would reckon that if he were to put the goals of stop killing games in order, and again that's only a guess, I would say he would place game preservation first and game ownership second, and provided that we look at the banning of players and mandatory updates separately, if the first one is game ownership, then the second one is clearly connected to game preservation. There is no preserving games without also preserving their authentic form. And I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, but the devs will release all the binaries after the game is no longer supported, so you are wrong. No, I'm not wrong. They'll give you the latest version of whatever you bought years ago because they no longer keep the original code, dust off their hands and and tell you, there you go, this is what you asked for, so our job here is done. Next thing you do is accept it without any resistance, like the good boy you are, and you will be, let's hear it, come on, you know the word, happy. Yes, you'll be happy because you can't be bothered asking the right questions, let alone work towards something until you see it through. And now I think it's only appropriate that we look at the last issue, the one which is without a shadow of a doubt the biggest obstacle the campaign will face. But this time I'm not referring to any ideas and suggestions, rather a certain entity. And I'm gonna try and be very careful how I phrase myself here, since I know for a fact that certain names and terms are being checked by the algorithm, so instead I'll be using multiple aliases for the organization in question, like maybe Eurobeats or the Union, something that's close enough to the actual name but doesn't say it explicitly for obvious reasons. So why do I think the talks at the parliament will face resistance from the same government body that gave its citizens a means to vote for a potential future legislation aiming to prevent the killing of games? That's a pretty good question, and also one that can't be answered without dropping a good few red pills, so don't tell me I didn't warn you beforehand. As many of you probably know, in the past 20 or so years, the European Union hasn't been too kind to its citizens. The rising costs of basic needs like food, energy and housing is outpacing wages, making it hard for the middle class and the poor to save up money. Immigration has become completely devoid of any logic, displacing people with next to no knowledge of the language spoken in the countries they take shelter in. In many cases, immigrants don't even have any high-value skills sought after by companies, so they have to settle for the lowest paid positions and survive from paycheck to paycheck just like their native counterparts. Unregulated immigration and half-assed integration programs also caused tribalism in previously homogeneous societies, creating unrests and hostilities between groups, causing crime spikes and converting peaceful streets and city centers into curfew districts. In addition to the aforementioned rise in the cost of living, a good few 12-star members impose bigger taxes on old vehicles as opposed to new ones, as if the lives of people driving cheap cars can't get any worse than that. Clearly done so that Euro pundits get even more coins after meeting a certain eco criteria. Cities like Lisbon, Rome, Milano, Brussels, the capital of Europe, and Paris have partially or even completely banned automobiles under European Emission Standard 3, making it impossible for a big number of people to commute unless they buy a more nature-friendly vehicle or use the public transport instead. Furthermore, taxpayers' money has been used towards the funding of totally unnecessary money laundering schemes, like including more women in the workplaces at the expense of better candidates, climate action, incentivizing thugs who apply for monetary help to plant an acre with olive trees, but instead they buy themselves Mercedes limousines and 3-story houses in the countryside, and many more examples of unmitigated stupidity. And if you think companies, and primarily ones that service production plants, have it any better, let me introduce you to the emissions trading system, also known as ETS, set up in 2005 by none else but the Union. The world's first international emissions trading system puts a cap on carbon emissions discharged by specific sectors, as it lowers the pollution threshold over time. The ETS also sells carbon allowances to companies, with a very small percentage of them being handed out for free, and they also take a portion of the revenue generated by businesses selling their surplus of allowances to other companies that are close to reaching their carbon limits. How is that detrimental though? Well, it is bad because the idea and the implementation of ETS motivates firms to produce less and trade more, which is absurd to say the least. The Eurobeats are literally trying to kill the main function of manufacturing facilities. And do you know who's also part of those factories affected by carbon emission caps? CD and DVD firms, the ones that print physical copies of video games, movies and music albums. The union that you think will pave the way for you to own games again is the same entity behind the master plan to kill physical media, which also led to you settling for licenses rather than fully owned by you palpable copies. They are the one who took away your tokens and replaced them with holograms. Now, it's not a secret that the Brussels sprouts have been working with big names in the gaming industry for a while, and that their goals are perfectly aligned to benefit both sides. A great example of this is, as I've already mentioned, the almost complete disappearance of physical media, which does a couple of things for developers and publishers. It eliminates manufacturing costs and helps game makers control what you play, when you play, and if you play at all. At the same time, the Euros get to savor the perks of ETS's perpetual money-making motor. And now you're probably asking yourselves, how do pollution restrictions affect goods from overseas then? It's simple. As one of the biggest markets in the world, the old continent imposes restrictions or even embargoes on some imported products, failing to meet their environmental criteria. So I think now you can see how and why certain policies and practices can easily bleed into other non-member countries or even whole continents. Another case of the 12-star flag being a complete disaster to the industry is the way they've always tried to police what's acceptable in video games and what isn't. Take for example 2008's proposal by the Consumer Commissioner Meglena Kunovic Geneva demanding that the gaming industry comes up with a voluntary code of conduct within 2 years to stop children having access to violent video games, or the EU Hate Speech Directive signed in 2016 requiring that online platforms, including those for video games, monitor and delete all kinds of bad words in chats and DMs. That's also the reason why so many people have had their accounts destroyed or suspended by publishers who simply don't want to waste their time moderating and sifting through text logs when they can just ban you with a single press of a button. What about the Digital Services Act, a regulation that exposes the hypocrisy of the big blue onion by dangling free speech as a fundamental right of its citizens in front of you, but also at the same time provides a means for people to flag illegal content such as hate speech. Yes, hate speech is illegal according to the union. Call me crazy, but I just don't see the freedom part in here. If I'm only allowed to say 90% of what I think without any repercussions, then that's not free speech. It's censorship. Not to mention that game studios and publishers are obligated to provide your data to the Brussels autocracy for the sake of investigation, solving and preventing crimes. So if you think your messages, voice chat history, IP address, credit card details and device specifications among other things are stored in a big black box nobody has access to, just pause the video right now and have a nice look at what's written on the screen. I also made sure to get that info from a totally reliable place by Redditor standards, so that you don't strike back with the good old "your sources trust me bro." So there you go. Now your choice to not believe in what I said is you simply being in denial. Something I almost forgot to mention is the extensive directive regarding copyright law in the digital market, published in April 2019, that pretty much limits the use of copyrighted works to a few types of institutions like schools, universities, museums of cultural heritage, scientific research facilities, government bodies, and verified news outlets. And even within those institutions, there are restrictions and prohibitions concerning the application of such content. So if you're interested to learn all about the do's and don'ts of licensed media, feel free to read all of this. It looks scary, but it won't take you that long, I promise. And I'm sure if theoretically at some point an actual law aiming to protect the consumers from scummy publisher practices is to be discussed at the parliament, that pile of already existing rules about intellectual property protection can prove to be a real pain in the neck to circumvent unless it's redacted from the ground up. Bear in mind that games are copyrighted material, much like music and films. It's been clearly stated in pretty much every end-user license agreement for as long as I can remember playing games, and I somehow doubt that the Euros will just walk back on policies that turn their trust among massive and influential allies like Ubisoft, Activision, EA, Sony, Microsoft, etc. Like, imagine Ursula opening her notepad one day and mustering the courage to inform Phil Spencer that Europe is no longer supporting their games as an illusion model and that she requires non-DRM physical and digital copies from now on with an end-of-life plan implemented in the pre-pro stage of development. That's not happening. And for those of you who think we're so back, I don't know what planet you live on, but it's high time you come back down to earth and taste a little bit of reality. See, I know this video has already become political enough, and I really dislike having that kind of content on what's supposed to be my games review channel, but I also can't stand the fact how uninformed people are and how they're latching onto a possibility that will more likely than not leave them disappointed. Just have a good look at the goals of Stop Killing Games and you'll eventually understand how flawed the first proposal is. The initiative requires video games sold to customers to be left in a reasonably working state at the time of shutdown / end of support. Sounds good on paper, but I have one very big problem with this sentence. My question is, what happens during the time of active support from publishers, which can last as long as several years or even decades? I'm gonna tell you what would change. Exactly nothing, unless unreasonable player bans and compulsory patches aren't addressed before the commission, again assuming we're given fair treatment as opposed to leaving the future of our hobby to sellouts and nasty pieces of work who take pleasure in working against their people's interests. My other issue with this campaign is that Ross Scott has completely given up on discussing retroactive implementation of the law. Now here's the thing, I have no problem excluding abandonware that at some point 16-17 years ago was playable online on the GameSpy servers. I'm talking about titles in my online libraries I can still play to this day when I press multiplayer, but they're also at risk of being shut down in the near future. What's stopping Respawn or DICE from handing over a game that's on its last legs to the player base and letting them figure out how to run their own dedicated servers? Obviously I won't ask such a thing from some poor indie dev or a AA studio in depth, but DICE? Activision? Ubisoft? Those are insanely rich game makers. Surely developer studios like them can be exceptions to the no retroactiveness rule. Games you paid money for are being shut down right under your noses, and nobody bats an eye because you guys have become mindless consumers hopping onto the newest remake or a sequel and completely forgetting about titles from the past that gave us so many special moments to cherish. Just 11 months ago, Battlefield 3 servers for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were terminated, and it's only a matter of time before they do the same to PC users. Are you okay with that? Do you sleep well knowing that your apathy is killing video games, yet you blame everyone but your lazy ass for what's happening in the industry? I bet you really hate what you're hearing right now, partially because it's true, but also to a great extent because you're used to watching YouTubers only saying what you wanna hear, thanking you for the subs, sucking up to you in order to reach that monthly followers goal. But I'm not that type of YouTuber, sorry to disappoint you I guess. I would rather make videos for a single person who isn't part of the matrix than pandering to hundreds of thousands of people that also watch Cold Carnage or The Act Man. And if you ever hear me turning into a shill, just unsubscribe and hit don't recommend channel, because at this point I've probably been replaced and my body thrown into a tub of hydrochloric acid. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here. As I said, the Union, big gaming companies and media sharing platforms are all working together to create a different landscape for current and future gens. A place where you're only allowed to say what they think is okay to say. A place where you don't own anything, but you're still happy since you have some form of access to what you pay them money for. A utopian society so devoid of privacy that you'd wish you moved to Mongolia sooner to milk cows and knit sweaters before you witness the rapid growth of surveillance jungles in your home city. Realistically speaking, I believe this initiative will be a complete failure on all fronts. It's just that no matter how I look at it, the odds are against us. I mean, if both the Union and game studios want edgy gamers banned for bullshit reasons, if they want us to erase physical from our minds and only purchase digital media, and lastly, if they're totally okay with paragraphs in EULA stating that you must destroy your physical copies upon license termination, I think you can understand a little why I'm so pessimistic about a positive outcome. The second most likely turn of events is a solution that pisses off everyone equally, a scenario where the Eurobeats require that publishers of entertainment media state the expiration date of games for which some form of server hosting is necessary, and also demand online marketplaces that they explicitly display the status of your purchases as licenses instead of own games. If that happens, I can see how digital media distributors might rethink their approach to advertising and even selling games, since they would inevitably sustain losses. Of course, addicts will continue ranting and getting excited, keeping the industry alive and well fed, so I'm not banking on that strategy as a viable solution. Normies are just too big of a variable for this to work in our favor. The third outcome, the one I think has very minimal chances of success, is actually Ross Scott's ideal development of the situation at hand, where we get to keep the titles we paid for in a reasonably playable state after their official shutdown, and also prohibiting developers from taking away games from our libraries, preventing cases similar to what Ubisoft did with The Crew. Now, to me the goals of Stop Killing Games in its current state only solve half of the problem, and I already explained why earlier in this video. We need clear demands concerning how consumers are treated throughout the active support period, because during that time publishers and developers can do whatever they want with players. They can ban them, update their game to a degree where the latest version looks nothing like the old ones. They can replace titles with their sequels, gaslighting us into thinking this is the same title just better. Even right now as I'm speaking, EULAs are being changed to bypass current and future, local and international consumer laws. And in my defense, I do genuinely believe Ross Scott's campaign is great in the sense that nobody has ever gone to such lengths to try and steer the industry in the right direction. But I also think that if those, as he calls them, fringe cases aren't taken seriously before it's too late, a hypothetical win would look more like a draw between players and game makers. Trust me, they will use TOS and EULAs as loopholes to exert control over you unless something changes. And that's also a good segue to what I regard as the least likely end result, as well as the optimal solution for buyers in the current state of the industry, that you can simply consider suggestions complementing the already established goals of Stop Killing Games. First and foremost, the codes of conduct in every TOS in existence must be nuked from space. We don't need that company parenting crap in our lives. Second, player bans should only apply to people who are trying to copy and distribute entire games, because the way I look at it is, if you're someone who's trying to disseminate a certain title before a set game is out of commerce, then that means you're probably trying to make money on the backs of developers, which is unacceptable. Also, I fully support companies taking legal actions against such individuals in the form of fines and jail time. Remember, one of the ideas behind this endeavor, even if not directly stated, is to cater to players who don't fancy the idea of obtaining software the illegal way. So if a lot of people now operates under the motto, if buying isn't owning, then pirating isn't stealing, I can see how the revival of possessing authentic copies can prompt many gamers to go for the real experience rather than opting for a free but sometimes inferior version of a game. As for those who make copies of abandonware, I believe an exception can be made as long as they don't profit from them. Still, that type of activity can be extremely hard to track unless we're talking a large-scale thing like a whole shop or a chain of places selling pirated video games. But let's say you've sent a cracked version of Battlefield 1942 to your friends for free just so that you can play the multiplayer. I don't think companies such as DICE or EA should lay any claims on that software because they've already taken it down from the stores years ago, their customer support no longer responds to emails about anything prior to Battlefield 3, and on top of all, no money is being made using their brand in that particular scenario. In this case, we can safely say we're deep in game preservation territory, therefore such actions shouldn't be considered criminal activity. And last but definitely not least, mandatory patches must be stopped. All sorts of graphical updates, inclusion of dialogue in games lacking voiceover, additional maps, characters, changing the aesthetics of games, and most importantly, replacing titles with their sequels is not okay. I paid for Overwatch 1 expecting it will stay in my library for as long as Blizzard functions as a publishing platform. Guess how many hours I have in this game? 0. So yeah, I'm a firm believer game companies should be held accountable for replacing and changing games without people's consent. As we're approaching the end of the video, I'd like to reiterate something very important. In fact, what I'm about to say is so crucial to understanding the effects of a potential games ownership law that you could skip the entire video and just watch this part alone to get the gist of my issues with the campaign at present. The main thing I want you to take away from this video is, even if we win, you're still not gonna be owning the games you buy for as long as they're being supported. This is the sad reality, but you need to hear it and come to terms with it. It's simply way too late to bring the 90s back. The goal of this upload is to provide a solution to this problem, or rather a band-aid of a sort, so that you're at least being given the illusion that you own games until they're discontinued. Now, before I sign off, I feel the urge to warn Accursed Farms about who he's up against. I'm not sure if you haven't already figured it out by yourself, since you mentioned, don't quote me on that, you had a degree in criminal investigation, but whoever is gonna be representing us in front of the commission ought to know that they won't be stood up in front of ordinary people. They'll be facing absolute sharks, the elite of member countries, highly trained professionals who have mastered the arts of deception and gaslighting. Those people have been taught to never crack under pressure, yet pressure their opponents until they crack. They aren't much different than their American counterparts in a sense that they're a congregation of agents in suits carrying out their mission. Again, if we have any chance at all versus the symbiotic monster consisting of the Union, game studios and video platforms, just know that you also need the right people acting on your behalf. Fight fire with fire, as they say. Those representatives must be well informed about all details surrounding scum industry practices, some of which I've talked about in this video. They need to be eloquent, intelligent, assertive, no lisping or giggly happy-go-lucky behavior. Pirate Software has all those qualities, but for better or worse he's not on our side. Louis Rossmann is a great example of a person who can hold his own during the talks, granted they put him on 70% speed. Even Mutahar would do a great job as a rep if he wasn't Canadian. Look, I genuinely respect you for what you've managed to achieve so far, but you have to understand that in order for your campaign to have any chance of succeeding, the goals of Stop Killing Games should be expanded on with more specific demands, and also realize how important sending the right people to that assemblage of wolves in Brussels is. And I believe I said what I wanted to say about Stop Killing Games during that whole post-petition limbo period, and I also really hope this video ages like milk, because if my predictions turn out true, that means only one thing: we have failed miserably. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I wish this video somehow reaches Ross Scott's feed and he takes some useful notes from it. Again, I'm not expecting or desiring any publicity, even more so that Accursed Farms is essentially a kids channel and I don't want to cause him any trouble with my problematic content. All I wish for is to help improve an initiative I have firmly stood behind since the very beginning and enjoy owning games once again like I used to. Anyway, see you next time. I'm out.